The alarm rang through the ship like a scream. Commander Laura Mitchell woke up fast and grabbed her flight suit. She had been dreaming about her home in Colorado, about the mountains and the blue sky. But dreams had to wait. War had come to humanity. It was the year 2347. Humans had spread across 3 star systems. They had built cities on Mars, colonies on distant moons, and stations floating in the darkness between stars. For 200 years, they had believed they were alone. Then the Cathari came. The Cathari were old. Their empire had existed for 10,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of worlds and destroyed dozens of species that stood in their way. To them, humans were just another young race that needed to be crushed before it could grow strong enough to challenge them. Laura ran through the metal corridors of the carrier, Dawn's Edge. Other pilots ran beside her, their faces tight with worry. Everyone had heard the news. The Cathari had sent 1,200 warships toward Earth, 1,200 ships against humanity's fleet of 200. The math was simple and terrifying. She reached the briefing room and found it already full. Pilots sat in rows of seats, their eyes fixed on the screen at the front. Admiral Patricia Dunn stood there, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and hard eyes. She had fought in the border wars 20 years ago. She knew what the Cathari could do. "I will not lie to you," the Admiral said. Her voice was calm but heavy. "This is the fight of our lives. The enemy has destroyed 2 of our colonies already. New Helsinki is gone. 12 million people. Brennan's world is gone. 8 million more. They are coming for Earth now, and they will not stop until every human is dead." Laura felt cold inside. She had friends on New Helsinki. Had friends? The thought hurt. The Admiral continued. "Our technology is not as good as theirs. Their ships are faster. Their weapons hit harder. Their shields can take punishment that would destroy our vessels. But we have something they do not understand. We have the will to fight even when the odds say we should lose. We have done it before. We will do it again." She pressed a button, and the screen changed. It showed a map of the solar system, with red dots moving toward a blue line near Saturn's moon Titan. "This is the Titan defense perimeter. It is our last line before Earth. The civilian evacuation has begun. 50 billion people need time to reach the emergency shelters or escape on transport ships. We must give them that time. We must hold the line." Laura looked around at her squadron. Squadron 42. 36 pilots, the best the fleet had. She had trained with these people for 5 years. She knew their faces, their fears, their dreams. Derek Santos sat beside her, his dark eyes focused on the screen. He was her second in command, quiet man who never wasted words but always said the right thing when it mattered. Behind them sat Katie Brennan, just 22 years old and already an ace with 15 kills. She had grown up on a space station and learned to fly before she could walk. Next to her was Marcus Cole, a veteran of 40 who had seen more combat than anyone in the squadron. His hair was going gray, and his hands were covered with old scars. But his flying was still smooth as water. There were others too. Timothy Grant, barely 20, fresh from the academy and trying not to show how scared he was. Nora Webb, who sent messages to her daughter on Earth every night. Gregory Palmer, who laughed at everything and made jokes even when things were bad. They were her family now. Her responsibility. After the briefing, Laura gathered them in the ready room. She stood in front of them and looked at each face in turn. She wanted to say something that would make the fear go away, but she knew that was impossible. Fear was honest. Fear meant they understood what they faced. "You heard the Admiral," she said. "The odds are against us. The enemy is stronger than us. But I have flown with you for years. I have seen what you can do. And I know that when the Cathari meet Squadron 42, they will learn something they never expected." "Oh." "What is that, Commander?" Laura smiled, but there was iron in it. "They will learn that humans do not know how to give up." Pilots nodded. Some smiled back. Katie cracked her knuckles, a habit she had when she was ready to fight. Marcus just watched with those calm, experienced eyes. They had 3 days before the enemy arrived. 3 days to prepare, to check their ships, To write letters home that might never be read? Laura spent the time in her fighter, running diagnostics and weapons checks. Her ship was an F-47 Raptor, a small craft built for speed and maneuverability. It could not match a Cathari fighter in a straight fight, but it could dance around one if the pilot was good enough. She was good enough. She had to be. The nights were the hardest. Laura would lie in her bunk and stare at the ceiling, thinking about everyone counting on them. 50 billion people on Earth. Children who had never seen a war. Families who just wanted to live their lives. They did not know the names of the pilots who would fight for them. They did not know about Squadron 42. But their lives depended on what happened in the darkness above Titan. On the second night, Derek found her in the observation deck. The great window showed the stars stretching out forever, cold and beautiful. Somewhere out there, the enemy fleet was coming closer with every second. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." He smiled and stood beside her. "I keep thinking about my sister. She lives in Mexico City with her kids. 2 boys, 7 and 9. They like to play spaceship in the backyard." Laura nodded. "What are their names?" "Carlos and Miguel. They want to be pilots like their uncle." His smile faded. "I told them being a pilot is not as exciting as it looks. I guess I was wrong." They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars. "Do you think we can win?" Laura asked. Derek thought about it. He was not a man who gave easy answers. "I think we can make them pay for every inch. I think we can show them that Earth is not worth the cost. And I think that sometimes that is enough." Laura hoped he was right. She hoped it with everything she had. On the third day, the alarms rang again. The Cathari had arrived early. Their ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel like wolves appearing from the darkness. 1,200 vessels, spreading out in formations that covered half the sky on the tactical display. Laura ran to her fighter, climbed into the cockpit. Her hands moved automatically, flipping switches and checking systems. Around her, the hangar was chaos and noise as pilots scrambled to their ships and crews, rushed to clear the launch tubes. The voice of the Dawn's Edge captain came through the speakers. "All squadrons, prepare for launch. May God be with you." Laura closed her eyes for 1 second. She thought of Colorado. She thought of mountains and blue sky. Then she opened her eyes and gripped the controls. "Squadron 42, she said into her radio. "This is Mitchell. Form up on me. Let us show them what humans can do." The launch tube opened. She flew out into the battle that would decide the fate of her species. Space was supposed to be silent. Laura had learned that in school. Sound could not travel in a vacuum. But inside her cockpit, the battle was deafening. Alarms screamed warnings. Her radio crackled with voices shouting orders and calling for help. Explosions bloomed in the darkness like deadly flowers. She could hear the impacts shaking her ship whenever debris struck the hull. The Cathari fighters were everywhere. They were sleek and silver, shaped like curved blades. Their engines glowed purple, and their weapons fired bolts of plasma that burned through human armor like fire through paper. 1 hit could cripple a raptor. 2 hits could kill. Laura twisted her ship hard to the right, dodging a burst of plasma that would have torn off her wing. She pulled back on the stick and looped around, coming up behind the enemy fighter that had attacked her. Her finger pressed the trigger, and her cannons roared. The Cathari ship exploded in a ball of orange flame. 1 down, she breathed. But there were hundreds more. She looked at her tactical display. The Third Fleet was spread across thousands of kilometers, small blue dots surrounded by a sea of red. Already she could see blue dots winking out as human ships died. The destroyer Valiant was gone. The frigate Northern Star was gone. Good ships, good crews, erased in seconds. Squadron 42 report. She called into her radio. The voices came back one by one. Derek was alive. Katie was alive. Marcus was alive. Tim was alive, his voice shaking but steady. Nora was alive. But Gregory Palmer did not answer. Neither did 3 others. Laura checked her display and saw the truth. 4 of her pilots were already dead. Her ship's nothing but scattered wreckage drifting in the void, for people she had known for years. For friends? Gone in the first 10 minutes, she did not have time to mourn. The battle would not wait for tears. "Follow me," she ordered. "We are heading for the enemy transports. If we can destroy them, we cut off their ground invasion." The squadron formed up behind her, 32 ships now instead of 36. They flew in a tight formation, covering each other as they pushed through the chaos of the battle. Cathari fighters came at them again and again, and each time the squadron fought them off. Katie shot down two, with a burst so precise it looked like she had planned it for hours. Marcus flew like he was part of his ship, dodging attacks that seemed impossible to avoid, but they lost more pilots along the way. Nora's ship took a hit to the engine and went spinning away, trailing fire. Laura saw her eject before the ship exploded, a small figure in a suit floaty. Inji in the darkness. There was no way to rescue her now. If they survived the battle, they would look for her. If they survived, the transports appeared on her display, a cluster of huge ships sitting behind the fighter screen. Each one carried thousands of Cathari soldiers, troops meant to land on Earth and hunt down the humans who could not escape. If those soldiers reached the surface, the war would become a nightmare of burning cities and endless killing. Laura could not let that happen. "Derek, find us a way through," she said. Derek was already working on it. His mind was strange in the best way. He could look at chaos and find patterns that no one else could see. He studied the enemy formation, watching how the fighters moved, how they rotated their positions. "There," he said. "Every 90 seconds, the fighters on the left flank shift to cover a gap in their formation. It creates an opening for about 12 seconds. If we time it right, we can punch through." 12 seconds. That was not much time, but it was enough. Laura watched the clock. She counted the rotations. She waited. Now she ordered. The squadron dove toward the gap. Plasma bolts flew around them, but the timing was perfect. They slipped through the fighter screen like water through fingers, and suddenly they were among the transports. The huge ships tried to run, but transports were slow and clumsy. They were not built for combat. They were built to carry soldiers, and those soldiers were trapped inside. Helpless Katie was the first to strike. She flew straight at the nearest transport, her cannons blazing. The bolts tore into the ship's hull, punching through armor and reaching the fuel tanks beneath. The transport broke apart in a massive explosion that lit up the darkness for kilometers. Marcus hit the next one, then Derek, then Laura herself, firing everything she had into a ship that tried to turn away. The transport's engines exploded, and the whole vessel crumpled like a crushed can. The Cathari fighters were coming back now, screaming toward them from all directions. Laura knew they had seconds before they would be surrounded and destroyed, but she kept firing. Another transport. Another. The squadron worked together like they had practiced 1,000 times. Each pilot knowing where the others would be without needing to look. 9 transports. They destroyed 9 transports before the fighters caught up with them. The retreat was brutal. They had to fight their way back through the same gap they had used to enter, but now the Cathari were ready for them. 2 more pilots died in the escape. Laura heard their screams cut off suddenly as their ships were torn apart. She wanted to stop, to go back, to do something. But there was nothing she could do except keep flying. They made it back to the Dawn's Edge with 24 pilots. 12 gone in a single engagement. Laura landed her fighter and sat in the cockpit, her hands shaking. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a cold emptiness. Derek's voice came through her radio. "Commander? That was incredible. 40,000 enemy soldiers dead. Their invasion timetable is ruined." Laura did not feel like celebrating. She felt like crying. But she pushed the feeling down, buried it deep where it could not reach her. There would be time for grief later. Right now. The battle was still raging. She climbed out of her cockpit and found the surviving pilots gathering in the hangar. They looked exhausted, their flight suits stained with sweat, their eyes hollow. But they were alive. For now, that had to be enough. Katie walked up to her. The young pilot's face was pale, but her jaw was set. "Orders, Commander?" Laura looked at her squadron. 24 pilots left out of 36. The battle had barely begun, and they had already lost a third of their people. Outside, the war continued. Ships were dying. People were dying. And they were the only ones who could stop it. "Refuel and rearm," Laura said. "We launch again in 30 minutes. No one complained. No one questioned. They just nodded and went to work. That was what Squadron 42 did. That was who they were. When the universe told them to quit, they kept fighting. When the odds said they would lose, they found a way to win. Laura watched them prepare and felt something she had not expected. Pride. These were the finest pilots humanity had ever produced, and they were following her into the darkness. She would not let them down. The next 30 minutes passed too quickly. Then the alarms rang again, and Squadron 42 launched back into the battle. The stars were waiting, cold and bright, filled with fire and death and the desperate hope of a species fighting for its survival. Laura flew at the front, leading her people toward the enemy. Behind her, Earth hung in the distance like a blue jewel. 50 billion lives. One squadron, she pushed her throttle forward and dove back into the fight. The battle lasted for 3 days. 72 hours of constant fighting, constant dying, constant fear. Laura stopped counting the sorties. She stopped counting the kills. She stopped counting everything except the pilots she had left. 18. That was the number now. 18 pilots out of the 36 she had started with. Half her squadron was dead, their names added to a list that grew longer with every hour. She knew she should feel something about that. Anger, maybe, or despair. But she was too tired to feel anything except the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her like a physical force. Sleep became impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw faces. Gregory Palmer, who had told jokes to keep everyone calm. He had been laughing about something when the plasma bolt hit his cockpit. Nora Webb had been rescued, thank God, but 3 of the pilots who went out to search for her had not come back. Their names were on the list now, too. Laura sat in the observation deck, staring at the stars. The battle raged on outside, flashes of light marking explosions and death. But from here, behind the thick glass, it almost looked beautiful, like fireworks, like a celebration instead of a slaughter. Derek found her there. He always seemed to know where she was, what she needed. He sat down beside her without speaking. They had known each other for 7 years, and sometimes words were not necessary. "I keep thinking I should say something to them," Laura finally said. "Something inspiring. Something that makes the fear go away." "Cannot make the fear go away," Derek replied. "Fear is how we know we are still alive." "Then what do I say?" Derek thought about it. He had a way of considering questions carefully, like each word mattered. "You say what is true, that you believe in them, that you will fly beside them until the end. That is all anyone can ask." Laura nodded slowly. It was good advice. Derek always gave good advice. She asked him about his sister again, about Carlos and Miguel playing spaceship in the backyard. Derek smiled when he talked about them. It was a small thing, that smile, but it reminded her why they were fighting. Not for glory or honor. For the people they loved. For the future those people deserved. Across the ship, other pilots were dealing with the pressure in their own ways. Marcus Cole had taken young Timothy Grant under his wing, teaching him the tricks of survival. They sat in the simulator room, running through maneuvers over and over. "The enemy will try to predict you," Marcus explained. "They have computers that can calculate where you will be in 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Your job is to be somewhere else." Tim nodded nervously. He was trying so hard to be brave, but Laura could see the fear in his eyes. He was barely 20 years old. A few months ago, his biggest worry had been passing his final exams. Now he was fighting in a war that might end his species. "How do you stay calm?" Tim asked Marcus. "When everything is exploding and people are dying, how do you keep flying?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. His scarred hands rested on the simulator controls, steady and sure. "I think about the people behind me, not the enemy in front. I think about my wife on Earth, my daughters in school. They are counting on me. As long as I remember that, I can keep flying. Tim absorbed this. Something in his expression changed, hardened. He was becoming a warrior, whether he wanted to or not. The battle was forging all of them into something new. Katie Brennan did not talk much anymore. The cheerful young pilot who had joked and smiled was gone, replaced by someone quieter and colder. She flew with terrifying precision, racking up kills that made her the highest-scoring ace in the fleet. But there was no joy in it. When she landed after each sortie, she went straight to her bunk and lay there, staring at nothing. Laura worried about her. She tried to talk to her once, asking if she was okay. Katie just looked at her with those empty eyes and said, "I will be okay when this is over?" Laura did not know what to say to that. She was not sure any of them would be okay, even if they survived. The Dawn's Edge was falling apart. The carrier had taken so much damage that entire sections were sealed off, venting atmosphere into space. The flight deck was scarred with blast marks and repair patches. Half the elevators did not work anymore, but the crew kept the ship running through sheer determination and impossible effort. Chief Engineer Samuel Ortiz had not slept in 2 days. He moved through the engineering section like a ghost, his uniform stained with grease and his eyes red from exhaustion. When a power coupling failed during the second night, he crawled into a maintenance shaft and fixed it with his bare hands while plasma fires burned around him. The other engineers called him crazy. He called it necessary. On the third night, the Cathari launched their biggest attack yet. They had recognized that the human carry RS were the key to the defense. Without carriers, the fighters could not refuel or rearm. Without fighters, the fleet would fall. So they sent 500 ships in a concentrated assault on the carrier group. The Dawn's Edge took 17 hits. Laura was in her cockpit when it happened, fighting desperately to protect her home. She saw the explosions ripping through the carrier's hull, saw fires blooming in the darkness. For one terrible hour, she thought the ship was dying, but Samuel Ortiz and his engineers performed a miracle. They sealed the breaches with emergency force fields. They rerouted power from non-essential systems to keep the shields online. They cannibalized parts from destroyed fighters to repair the engines. When the attack finally ended, the Dawn's Edge was still flying. Barely, but still flying. Laura landed her fighter in a hangar filled with smoke and debris. She climbed out and stood there, looking at the damage. Bodies were being carried away on stretchers. Crews were spraying foam on fires. The ship groaned around her, metal stressed almost to breaking. Derek landed beside her. His ship was even more damaged than hers, missing half a wing and trailing sparks. He walked over and stood with her, surveying the chaos. "We are not going to survive this," Laura said quietly. It was not a question. "Just a statement of fact," Derek nodded. "Probably not." "Then why do we keep fighting?" He looked at her, and there was something fierce in his eyes. Something that would not break, no matter how bad things got. Because somewhere behind us, a child is sleeping in their bed. They do not know about this battle. They do not know that we exist. But when they wake up tomorrow, they will be alive. Because we were here. Because we did not give up. Laura felt tears on her cheeks. She had not cried since the battle began. She had not allowed herself to cry. But now, standing in the ruins of her ship with the weight of impossible odds crushing down on her, she let herself feel it. The grief, the fear, the love. Then she wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. There was work to do. There was always more work to do. "Squadron meeting in 10 minutes, she said. "We have a new plan." Derek raised an eyebrow. "What plan?" Laura looked out through the damaged hangar bay, toward the distant lights of the enemy fleet. Somewhere in that swarm was the command ship. "The heart of the Cathari attack. You're going to cut off the head of the snake," she said. The briefing room on the flagship Resolute was quiet. Too quiet. Admiral Patricia Dunn stood at the front, her face showing the exhaustion that everyone felt. Around her sat the remaining squadron commanders and ship captains, men and women who had watched their forces shrink hour by hour. Laura sat in the third row, Derek beside her. She had been summoned here along with the other squadron leaders to hear the Admiral's final plan. The plan that would decide whether humanity lived or died. The evacuation is 80% complete, the Admiral said. 40 billion people are now in shelters or on transport ships heading out of the system. We need 12 more hours to finish. 12 hours. She paused, letting the weight of that number sink in. We have less than 60 ships left. The enemy still has over 800. At our current rate of losses, we will be destroyed in 6 hours. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. The math was simple and brutal. The Admiral pressed a button, and the screen behind her changed. It showed the enemy formation, with one ship highlighted in red at the center. The ship was massive, nearly 3 kilometers long. It bristled with weapons and shield generators. It was the ugliest, most terrifying thing Laura had ever seen. This is the Cathari command ship, the Admiral continued. Their flagship. Every order, every tactical decision, every movement of their fleet comes from this vessel. If we destroy it, their coordination will collapse. It will not win the war, but it will buy us the time we need. A captain in the front row spoke up. Admiral, that ship is the most heavily defended target in their entire fleet. We would need everything we have just to get close to it. And even then, the odds of success are nearly zero, the Admiral finished. I know. That is why I'm calling for volunteers. Silence again. Laura could feel the fear in the room. Everyone knew what the Admiral was asking. She was asking for people to die. Laura thought about her pilots. 18 left out of 36. She thought about Derek and Katie and Marcus and Tim. She thought about asking them to fly into the heart of the enemy formation, knowing they would probably never come back. Then she thought about the child Derek had mentioned. The child sleeping in their bed, not knowing that strangers were fighting and dying to protect them. She thought about 50 billion people who deserved a chance to live. She stood up. Squadron 42 volunteers. Every head in the room turned to look at her. The Admiral met her eyes, and Laura saw something there. Respect, maybe. Or gratitude. Or both. Thank you, Commander Mitchell. Are there other volunteers? 3 more squadrons stood. 12 pilots each. Combined with their 18, that gave them a strike force of 54 fighters. 54 ships against a fortress that could destroy battlecruisers. The Admiral nodded. Very well. Here is the plan. The plan was insane. Laura listened with growing disbelief as the Admiral explained it. They would fly through an asteroid field at attack speed, using the rocks as cover to avoid detection. They would hit the command ship from below where sensors were weakest. They would split into 3 groups, 1 to draw fire, 1 to destroy the shield generators, and 1 to attack the reactor core. It was not a plan. It was a suicide mission with extra steps, but it was all they had. Laura returned to the Dawn's Edge, gathered her pilots in the ready room. They looked at her with tired eyes, waiting for whatever news she brought. She could see how much the battle had taken from them. They were running on nothing but willpower now, their bodies and minds pushed far past normal limits. I will not lie to you, she said. This mission is dangerous. More dangerous than anything we have done so far. We are going to attack the enemy command ship. We are going to fly into the heart of their defenses and try to destroy their flagship. She watched their faces. Some went pale. Some nodded grimly. Katie's expression did not change at all. I asked for volunteers, and I am asking again now. Anyone who does not want to fly this mission can stay behind. No one will judge you. No one will think less of you. You have already given more than anyone could ask. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Marcus Cole stood up. Commander, I have been flying for 20 years. I have fought in 3 wars, and I have never served with pilots as good as this squadron. He looked around at his fellow pilots. I am not staying behind. I am flying with my family. One by one, the others stood. Derek, Katie, Tim, his young face set with determination. Every single one of them. 18 pilots, not one stepping back. Laura felt her throat tighten. Then let us make history. They launched at 3 a.m, ship time. The stars were cold and sharp, and the asteroid field loomed ahead like a wall of floating mountains. Laura led her squadron into it, weaving between rocks the size of buildings. her instruments screaming warnings that she ignored. The other squadrons flew with her. 54 ships, moving fast and quiet through the darkness. Derek had mapped their route, finding a path through the sensors that should keep them hidden until they were almost on top of the target. It worked. They lost 2 ships to asteroid collisions, pilots who zigged when they should have zagged, their fighters crumpling against stone, but the rest made it through. When they emerged on the other side, the command ship hung before them like a metal mountain. Laura had never seen anything so big. It made the Dawn's Edge look like a toy. Weapons platforms covered its surface like spines. Shield generators glowed with energy. Hangar bays held hundreds of fighters. It was a floating city, a weapon of war beyond anything humanity had ever built, and she was going to destroy it. All squadrons begin attack, she ordered. Group 1, create your diversion. Group 2, hit those shield generators. Group 3, follow me. The battle began. Marcus led Group 1, the diversion team. 20 pilots flying straight into the teeth of the enemy defenses, drawing fire away from the others. It was the most dangerous job, and he had volunteered for it without hesitation. His fighters screamed toward the command ship, cannons blazing. Weapons platforms tracked them and opened fire. Plasma bolts filled the space around them, turning the darkness into a storm of deadly light. Ships exploded left and right, but Marcus kept flying, kept fighting, kept drawing attention. He destroyed 7 weapons platforms before they hit him. His ship took 3 direct hits, and alarms screamed as systems failed. He was dead and he knew it. But instead of ejecting, he aimed his crippled fighter at an enemy hangar bay. "Tell my wife I love her," he said into the radio. Then he triggered his reactor overload. The explosion tore through the hangar bay, destroying dozens of Cathari fighters before they could launch. Marcus Cole died the way he had lived, protecting the people beside him. Laura heard the explosion over her radio. She heard the silence that followed, but she could not stop. She could not slow down. Marcus had given them an opening, and she had to use it. Derek led Group 2 against the shield generators. Katie flew beside him, her ship moving like it was part of her body. They hit the generators with everything they had, flying through defensive fire that should have killed them 10T. Mies over. One generator exploded. Then another. Then another. The command ship's shields began to flicker. Laura saw her chance. Group 3, with me. We are going in. She dove toward the opening in the hole that Marcus had created. Her group followed, 6 ships flying into the belly of the beast. They entered the command ship through the ruined hangar bay, racing through corridors of metal and fire toward the reactor core. It was madness. Automated defenses tried to stop them. Bulkheads slammed shut in their path. But they kept flying, kept pushing, kept refusing to die. 3 more pilots fell. Their ships hit walls or were cut down by internal weapons. But Laura and the survivors reached the reactor core. It glowed ahead of them, a sphere of pure energy that powered the entire ship. Tim Grant was beside her. The young pilot, who had been so scared at the beginning of the battle now, flew with calm precision. Marcus had taught him well. "Take the shot," Laura ordered. Tim fired. His missiles streaked toward the reactor core and struck true. The explosion that followed was the most beautiful thing Laura had ever seen. The command ship died slowly. It did not explode all at once like smaller vessels. Instead, it fell apart piece by piece. Secondary explosions ripping through its massive hull as the reactor's destruction spread like a disease. Fire and debris erupted from every section, and the great ship that had led the Cathari Armada began its long fall into the darkness. Laura flew as fast as her damaged fighter could manage. Racing ahead of the spreading destruction, behind her, the surviving pilots of Group 3 followed. Only 3 of them left now. 3 out of the 6 who had entered the ship. Tim was still with her. So was a pilot named Rachel from one of the other squadrons. The rest were gone, swallowed by the fire. They burst out of the dying ship just seconds before the hull collapsed completely. The command ship crumpled in on itself, a mountain of metal folding like paper. Then the final explosion came. A blast of light so bright that Laura's cockpit automatically darkened to protect her eyes. When she could see again, the command ship was gone. Only debris remained, spinning slowly in the void where the enemy flagship had been. For a moment, there was silence. Then the radio exploded with voices. The Cathari fleet was in chaos. Without their command ship, without their central coordination, the enemy vessels began to scatter. Ships that had been attacking in perfect formation now moved randomly, confused and directionless. Some tried to continue fighting. Others began to retreat. None of them knew what to do. Admiral Dunn's voice cut through the noise. All ships, this is the flagship. The enemy command vessel has been destroyed. Press the attack. Push them back. What was left of the Third Fleet rallied. The battered human ships, fewer than 50 now, surged forward against an enemy that no longer knew how to fight. It was not a victory yet. The Cathari still outnumbered them badly. But the tide had turned. Laura flew back toward the Dawn's Edge in a daze. Her hands were shaking on the controls. Her mind could not fully process what had just happened. They had done it. Against all odds, against every calculation that said they should fail, they had destroyed the enemy flagship. She landed in the hangar bay and sat in her cockpit for a long time, unable to move. The adrenaline was draining out of her body, leaving behind nothing but exhaustion and a strange, hollow feeling she could not name. Derek found her there. He was alive. His ship had been badly damaged in the attack on the shield generators, but he had made it back. He climbed up to her cockpit and looked at her with those dark, steady eyes. "Laura," he said. "It is over." She shook her head. "Not yet. The battle is still going. It's not for us. Not tonight." He reached out and put his hand on her shoulder. "You did it. You saved them." Laura thought about the 50 billion people on Earth. She thought about the evacuation transports. Safe now because of what her squadron had done. She thought about Derek's nephews, Carlos and Miguel, who would wake up tomorrow in a world that had not ended. She started to cry. Not sad tears this time. Not grief or fear. Just release. Just the weight of everything finally becoming too heavy to carry alone. Derek helped her out of the cockpit. He walked beside her as she made her way through the damaged ship, past crews still fighting fires and repairing systems. They reached the observation deck, and they stood there together. Watching the battle wind down through the great window, the Cathari were retreating. Ship after ship was turning away, fleeing back toward the depths of space. They had lost too many vessels, lost their command structure, lost their will to fight. The invasion of Earth was over. Squadron 42 had launched with 36 pilots. 11 made it back. The losses were staggering. Laura could recite the names in her head, every single one. Marcus Cole, who had given his life to create their opening. Gregory Palmer, who had died laughing on the first day. Nora Webb had survived her ejection and was recovering in the medical bay, but so many others were gone forever. 25 pilots. 25 friends. 25 heroes who would never see their homes again. Katie Brennan walked into the observation deck. The young ace looked different now. The cold emptiness in her eyes had been replaced by something softer. She had been crying too. "Commander," she said, "I wanted to thank you for what?" Katie looked out at the stars, at the distant flashes of light where the last of the battle was fading away. "For not giving up? When everything said we should lose, you kept fighting. You showed us what we could be." Laura did not know what to say to that. She was just a pilot. She had done her job, same as everyone else. But looking at Katie, looking at the young woman who had become a legend during this battle, she understood something important. They had all become legends. Every pilot in Squadron 42, every person who had fought and died above, Titan. They had written their names in history with fire and courage, and the universe would never forget. Tim Grant found them a few hours later. The young pilot was exhausted but smiling. He had been the one to fire the shot that killed the enemy flagship. Marcus would have been proud. "Admiral Dunn is making an announcement," he said. "You should come." They gathered with the rest of the fleet's survivors to watch the Admiral's address. She stood on the bridge of the Resolute, looking into the camera with eyes that had seen too much death. "To all ships of the Third Fleet," she said, To all the men and women who fought beside me these past 4 days, we have won a great victory today. The enemy is retreating. Earth is safe. The evacuation is complete." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "This victory came at a terrible cost. We have lost good people, good ships, good friends. I wish I could bring them back. I wish I could tell their families that their sacrifice was not necessary. But I cannot. All I can tell you is that their sacrifice meant something. Because of what we did here, humanity will survive. Because of what we did here, our children will have a future." Laura listened with tears running down her face. Around her, the other pilots were crying too. Even Derek, who never showed emotion, had tears in his eyes. "I want to specifically honor Squadron 42, the Admiral continued. "Led by Commander Laura Mitchell, these pilots undertook an impossible mission and succeeded against all odds. They are the reason we stand here today. They are the best of what humanity can be," the Admiral saluted. And across the fleet, thousands of voices cheered. Later, when the ceremonies were over and the reports were filed, Laura sat in her quarters and tried to write her final mission summary. She stared at the blank screen for a long time, searching for words that could capture what they had experienced. The fear, the courage, the love, the loss. In the end, she wrote only a single line. "They asked us to hold the line. We did." That was the truth. That was all that mattered. Centuries later, humanity spread across the galaxy. They built empires and forged alliances with alien species. They became a power that shaped the destiny of 1,000 worlds, and in schools on planets that did not yet exist when the battle was fought. Children learned about Squadron 42. They learned about Laura Mitchell, the commander who never gave up. About Derek Santos, whose tactical brilliance saved millions of lives. About Katie Brennan, the ace who became death itself to the enemies of her people. About Marcus Cole, who gave everything so that others could live. About Tim Grant, the young pilot who fired the shot heard across the universe. They learned that when the darkness came. When extinction seemed certain, ordinary humans had risen to meet the challenge. Not because they were special, not because they were superheroes, but because they refused to accept defeat, because they loved their homes and their families, their future more than they feared death. And that was the story of the space battle of the era. The story of Squadron 42. The story of how humanity looked at impossible odds and said, "We will find a way." The universe had learned something about humans that day, something the Kethari and every other species who dreamed of conquest would never forget. When you threaten the people humanity loves, humanity fights back. And when humanity fights back, it does not stop until it wins. That was the truth. Written in fire and courage above, Titan, that was the legacy of Squadron 42. That was the promise that humanity would keep for all the ages to come. They would never give up. They would never surrender. And they would always, always protect their own.